In the vast silence of the frontier, a person's true character is not spoken in words, but forged in the choices they make when all hope seems lost. The dust of Silver Creek settled like a shroud on Amelia Warren's worn dress. She held her newborn daughter, Rose, the infant's soft cries a fragile sound against the oppressive silence of the street. Before her stood Bartholomew Fletcher, his shadow swallowing the doorway of the home her late husband Arthur had built. Fletcher, owner of the Blackstone mine that held the town in its grip, looked down at her, his face a mask of cold avarice. "Your time here is over, woman," his voice boomed, scattering a flock of nearby crows. "This land, this house, it all belongs to me now. You have until sundown." Amelia's stepchildren, 10-year-old Lily and 8-year-old Leo, clung to her skirts, their eyes wide with a terror that mirrored her own. The townspeople watched from a distance, their faces impassive. They were prisoners of Fletcher's wealth, their silence bought with the promise of work in his mine. "My marriage to Arthur was legal," Amelia whispered, her voice hoarse with grief. "This is his home. These are his children." Fletcher let out a harsh laugh. "A piece of paper signed by a traveling preacher? That is not law in my town. You and your brats are trespassing on my property." He took a menacing step forward, his large frame blocking out the sun. "I have a deed, signed and sealed by the territorial judge himself." It was a lie, and they both knew it, but his power made it truth. Desperation gave Amelia a sliver of courage. "Arthur left other papers," she said, her voice gaining a hint of strength. "Papers that prove my claim. Papers that you will never find." A flicker of something. Was it uncertainty? Crossed Fletcher's face before his usual sneer returned. He was a man who hated surprises. A bully who relied on fear, not facts. The baby began to cry louder, a wail of infant misery that seemed to amplify Amelia's own despair. Fletcher's cold eyes darted to the child, then back to the woman holding her. "Sundown," he repeated, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Do not test my patience." He turned and walked away, his boots kicking up clouds of dust that seemed to choke the very air. Amelia stood frozen, a lone figure against the vast, indifferent landscape. She was a widow, with 3 children and no home, with nothing but a desperate bluff and a rapidly setting sun. As the sky bled into shades of orange and purple, Amelia packed what little she could carry. Hope was a dying ember in her heart. The town had turned its back on her, leaving her utterly alone. Just as the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the jagged peaks, 2 figures emerged from the twilight. They moved with a silent grace that was both beautiful and unsettling, their buckskin clothing blending with the shadows. It was Kalen and his uncle Talon, warriors from the tribe that lived in the canyons beyond the town. Their arrival was as sudden and quiet as a hawk's descent. Kalen stopped directly in front of Fletcher, who had come to oversee Amelia's eviction. The warrior's face was calm, but his dark eyes held a storm. "Arthur Warren was a friend to my people," Kalen said, his voice quiet yet carrying an undeniable authority that cut through the evening air. "He gave his word that his family would be safe. His word still stands." As he spoke, his gaze met Amelia's, and in that brief moment, a silent understanding passed between them, a connection that felt older and deeper than this single, terrible day. Fletcher scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "I do not deal with savages. This is my town, my law." But a seed of doubt had been planted. A conflict with the native tribe was bad for business. It would draw unwanted attention and disrupt the flow of silver from his mine. He was a businessman first, and a tyrant second. Talon, whose weathered face held the wisdom of many seasons, simply watched, his presence a silent testament to a strength that Fletcher could not comprehend. The standoff was a battle of wills, fought in the charged silence of the dying day. Kalen did not rise to the insult. His focus remained on Amelia, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Arthur knew this day might come," he said, speaking to her as if they were the only 2 people there. "He asked me to watch over you, to protect you and the children. I will honor that promise." The words were a lifeline, a sudden, unexpected glimmer of hope in the encroaching darkness. For the first time since Arthur's death, Amelia felt she was not entirely alone in her fight against the darkness that was Bartholomew Fletcher. The fragile truce was shattered by Sheriff Corbin, a man whose loyalty was as tarnished as the badge on his chest. "These heathens are disturbing the peace," he yelled, motioning to a group of Fletcher's hired men loitering nearby. They began to shove their way through the small crowd of onlookers, manufacturing chaos. It was a classic tactic: create a disturbance, provoke a reaction, and then use that reaction as an excuse for violence. They wanted to make Kalen the aggressor in a fight he had not started, to justify whatever brutality was to follow. But Talon was a student of his enemy's ways. He placed a calm hand on his nephew's arm, his touch a silent command for restraint. "Patience, Kalen," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "Our purpose is to save them, not to fight shadows." He understood that Fletcher's power was built on public perception. A street brawl would only serve the mine owner's narrative, painting them as wild men and Amelia as a woman who associated with them. Their victory had to be won with wisdom, not just with strength. The moment for a direct confrontation had not yet come. In the midst of the turmoil, Kalen moved with purpose. He reached Amelia, his hand closing around hers. The contact was electric, a silent acknowledgement of the bond between them. "Now," he said, his voice urgent, "we must go. To the stables." He pulled her gently but firmly, leading her and the children through the confused throng. Lily and Leo, sensing the shift, followed without a word, their small hands clutching Amelia's dress. They moved like ghosts through the chaos, their escape shielded by the very commotion designed to entrap them. Fletcher let out a roar of pure fury when he realized they were slipping through his fingers. He drew his firearm, the metallic click loud in the evening air. But Talon, ever watchful, created one last diversion, toppling a stack of barrels that sent a cascade of noise and confusion through the street. It was only a moment, but it was enough. By the time Fletcher had a clear line of sight, they had reached the stables, mounted the horses that had been waiting, and were disappearing into the vast, protective darkness of the open plains. They rode until the moon was high, finally making a cold camp in a hidden arroyo. Once the children were asleep, wrapped in blankets by the small fire, Kalen spoke the words Amelia had both feared and expected. "Arthur's death was not an accident," he said, his voice heavy. "The support beam in that tunnel was deliberately weakened. Fletcher wanted your husband gone. He knew about the gold seam that runs beneath your land, a seam far richer than anything in the Blackstone mine." The truth was a cold weight in the pit of her stomach. He continued, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. "Arthur was a good man, but he was not a fighter. He knew he could not stand against Fletcher alone. He also knew about us, Amelia." He looked at her then, his eyes filled with a sorrowful honesty. "He saw the way we looked at each other during my visits to trade. He was not blind." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. She had buried her feelings for Kalen deep within her heart out of loyalty and respect for her kind, older husband. She never knew he had seen. "In his last days, he came to me," Kalen confessed. "He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would protect you. He said your happiness was more important than his pride. He wanted you to be free to live." The unspoken words hung between them, free to love. It was a revelation that shook Amelia to her core. Arthur had not just been her husband. He had been her quiet protector, planning for her future even as his own was coming to a violent end. She had mourned a husband, but now she mourned a true and selfless friend. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. It was not a tear of sorrow, but of a profound, heart-wrenching gratitude. Her marriage had been a safe harbor, a gentle companionship, but the wild, untamable feeling she had for Kalen was a storm, a force of nature she had tried to deny. Now, in the quiet of the wilderness, with the weight of Arthur's final blessing settling upon her, she allowed herself to feel it. The bond between them, once a secret spark, was now a steady flame, warming the cold night. At dawn, a rider from Kalen's village found their camp. He brought news that was both a relief and a new kind of terror. Fletcher had not sent the children to an orphanage. Instead, he had ridden to the county seat and used a bribed official to forge guardianship papers. He was now the legal guardian of Lily and Leo. He does not want them gone, Talon surmised, his brow furrowed in thought. He wants them as leverage. They are his hostages. He will use them to force your hand, Amelia. He wants you to return. Kalen's jaw tightened. It is not just the land he is after. It is the documents. Arthur told me he kept a hidden ledger, a record of every dishonest deal Fletcher ever made, every ounce of gold he stole from other claims. That ledger is Fletcher's ruin, and he knows it. The plan was diabolical in its cruelty. Fletcher was using the children as bait, betting that a mother's love would be the key to destroying the evidence that could send him to prison for the rest of his miserable life. Their only path forward led to a town called Redemption Creek. There is a lawyer there, Kalen explained. A man named Alistair Blackwood. Arthur trusted him completely. He sent copies of all his legal papers to Blackwood for safekeeping, including his last will and testament. It was a slim chance, a desperate gamble. They had to get to Blackwood, secure the authentic documents, and expose Fletcher's fraud before he could tighten his grip on the children. The race was on, and the stakes were impossibly high. The scout also brought a small, leather-bound book. Arthur gave this to my father, he said, handing it to Kalen. He said it was for you, Amelia, when the time was right. It was Arthur's journal. As Amelia opened it, her eyes fell upon the last entry. I have asked Kalen to protect her. He is a man of honor. Her heart knows his. May she find the peace I could not give her. The words were a final, painful blessing, a confirmation of the path she was now on. The journey to Redemption Creek was no longer just for survival. It was for justice. The trail to Redemption Creek was a harsh, unforgiving ribbon of dirt and rock. Sheriff Corbin and his posse were never far behind, their presence a constant pressure. They were skilled trackers, and Kalen had to use all his knowledge of the land to keep them at bay. In a place the natives called the Whispering Canyon, Corbin's men set their trap. The first shot came without warning, the sound echoing off the canyon walls as a bullet ricocheted inches from Lily's head. They were caught in a deadly crossfire, with nowhere to run. This way, Kalen yelled, pulling his horse onto a barely visible goat trail that snaked up the canyon wall. It was a perilous climb, a desperate scramble over loose scree and treacherous ledges. Bullets whined around them, chipping away at the rock. They were exposed, vulnerable, but it was their only chance. Talon provided cover fire, his old rifle speaking with deadly accuracy, forcing Corbin's men to keep their heads down long enough for the others to escape the kill zone. They broke free, but the chase had taken its toll. Exhausted and with dwindling supplies, they stumbled upon a remote trading post, a solid-looking structure of logs and sod nestled in a grove of cottonwoods. A woman emerged, her face as weathered as the landscape, a rifle held loosely in her arms. "You must be Amelia," she said, her voice raspy but kind. "I am Martha. Arthur was a good friend. He told me you might be coming." She was the lifeline they so desperately needed, a bastion of civilization in the middle of a vast and hostile wilderness. Inside the cool, dim trading post, Martha tended to their needs with a quiet efficiency. She dressed a shallow cut on Leo's arm with a poultice of herbs that smelled of mint and earth. "That Fletcher is a coiled viper," she grumbled, her eyes sharp and intelligent. Arthur knew it. "He told me, if anything ever happened, my home was yours. You are safe behind these walls. Corbin and his dogs can howl at the moon all they want, but they will not get through my door." For the first time in days, Amelia felt a fragile sense of security. They reached Redemption Creek under the cover of a moonless night. The office of Alistair Blackwood was a small, unassuming building, but inside, the elderly lawyer was a bastion of integrity. He listened to their story with a grave expression before turning to the large iron safe in the corner. He produced a worn leather portfolio. Arthur was a wise man, Blackwood said, his voice filled with respect. "It is all here, the true deed to your land, his will naming you guardian of the children, and a detailed account of Fletcher's criminal activities." A wave of relief so profound it was dizzying washed over Amelia. It was the proof they needed, the key to their salvation. But just as Blackwood laid the documents on his desk, the office door swung open with a violent crash. Sheriff Corbin stood there, his face alight with triumph. And beside him, his expression a mixture of shame and defiance, was Rorik, Kalen's younger brother. The rifle in his hands was pointed not at Corbin but at Kalen. The betrayal was absolute, a cold, sharp blade to the heart. Kalen stared at his brother, his face a mask of disbelief and pain. "Rorik? Why?" Rorik's gaze faltered, unable to meet his brother's eyes. "Fletcher offered us a future, Kalen," he said, his voice strained. "Land of our own, a place at the table. He said we could be respected, not feared. No more living on the scraps they leave us." He was echoing the hollow promises of a desperate man, a man who had traded his honor for a place in a world that would never truly accept him. "He offered you chains and called it a partnership," Talon said, his voice laced with a deep, sorrowful contempt. The air in the small office was thick with tension, a poisonous mixture of dashed hopes and shattered loyalties. They were trapped, surrounded by Corbin's men. Their hard-won proof was within arm's reach, yet it felt a million miles away. The victory they had been so close to grasping had turned to ash in their mouths, a bitter taste of betrayal that was worse than any defeat. Sheriff Corbin's smile was a smug, ugly thing. He had them. The documents, the fugitives, everything. He gestured with his firearm. "Hand over the papers, old man. It is over." But Alistair Blackwood, a man who had faced down corporate bullies and armed outlaws for 40 years, did not flinch. He calmly walked back to his desk, ignoring Corbin's command, and picked up a telegraph form. "On the contrary, Sheriff," he said, his voice as crisp as a new banknote, "I believe it is just beginning. You are, in fact, too late." He held up the form for them to see. "An hour ago, I sent a rather lengthy telegram to Federal Marshal Everett Ridley at Fort Laramie. I find it is always wise to have a contingency plan." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Marshal Ridley is a man of legendary integrity. He is also a man who despises territorial corruption. I informed him that I am in possession of documents detailing extensive federal mining fraud, and that my clients' lives were in immediate danger." The color drained from Corbin's face. This was no longer a simple matter of bullying a widow. This was a federal case. Rorik's defiant posture crumbled, replaced by the dawning horror of a man who realizes he has made a catastrophic mistake. He had allied himself with a common criminal against the power of the United States government. He had not secured a future for his people. He had endangered them, trading a foolish dream for a certain prison cell. Blackwood pressed his advantage. "Marshal Ridley and his deputies will be here on the morning train. I suggest you gentlemen make yourselves comfortable. Any harm that befalls my clients between now and then will be viewed most unfavorably by the marshal." The tables had turned with breathtaking speed. The hunters had become the hunted. The small law office was no longer a trap, but a fortress. Now, all they had to do was survive the night, waiting for the dawn and the arrival of the law. Morning arrived with a palpable tension. The town square was crowded with onlookers as Marshal Ridley, a tall, grim-faced man with eyes that missed nothing, stepped off the train. Fletcher was already there, flanked by his lawyers, attempting to control the narrative. He spoke of a grieving, unstable widow being manipulated by cunning heathens, a tale of lies spun with the confidence of a man who believed his money could buy any truth. But Marshal Ridley was not listening to him. He was watching Amelia. With Blackwood at her side and Kalen standing protectively behind her, Amelia presented her case. She did not raise her voice or weep. She spoke with a quiet, unshakable dignity, laying out the facts one by one, her words supported by the damning evidence in Arthur's ledger. As she spoke, the crowd grew silent, and Fletcher's confident facade began to crumble, revealing the desperate, greedy man beneath. He was losing control, and he knew it. In a final, insane gambit, Fletcher lunged forward. He was not aiming for the documents. He was aiming for the baby in Amelia's arms. "She is the cause of all this!" he screamed, his face contorted with rage, trying to snatch Rose to use as a shield or a bargaining chip. The crowd gasped in horror. The marshal moved to intervene, but he was a fraction too slow. It was a moment of pure chaos, a descent into madness under the watchful eye of the law. But someone else was faster. Leo, who had been standing silently by his stepmother's side, reacted with instinct born of love and fear. He grabbed a heavy leather satchel from the station platform and swung it with all his might, catching Fletcher squarely on the knee. The larger man howled in pain and stumbled, his lunge thwarted. That single, decisive act of courage gave Marshal Ridley the opening he needed. He subdued Fletcher, the sharp click of handcuffs sealing the mine owner's fate. Justice had been delivered, not by a firearm, but by a child's fierce love. 6 months passed. The trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. Bartholomew Fletcher and Sheriff Corbin would spend the rest of their lives in a federal penitentiary. Rorick, for his cooperation and testimony, received a much lighter sentence. He wrote to Kalin from prison, a letter filled with remorse and a promise to one day earn back the honor he had lost. Silver Creek, free from Fletcher's shadow, began to breathe again, its future uncertain but filled with a new kind of hope. The Blackstone mine, under the terms of Arthur's will and a new agreement brokered by Blackwood, became a joint enterprise. Amelia, as the owner of the land, and Kalin's tribe, as partners in the operation, created a new model of cooperation. The profits were shared, the land was respected, and the town began to prosper in a way it never had under Fletcher's tyrannical rule. The old divisions began to fade, replaced by a shared sense of purpose and community. Amelia and Kalin were married in a simple ceremony under the wide prairie sky, attended by the people of Silver Creek and the people of the canyons. Their love, tested by fire and betrayal, had become the bedrock of a new, blended family. Lily, Leo, and Rose were raised with 2 cultures, 2 languages, and one unwavering truth. That family is defined by love, not by blood. They were a living symbol of the future Arthur had dreamed of. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold, Amelia stood on the porch of her home. Kalin came to stand beside her, his arms circling her waist. Rose, now a happy, babbling toddler, played at their feet. The sounds of the town, laughter, music, the distant, steady rhythm of the mine, were a peaceful symphony. The story that had begun with a threat in the dust had found its end in the quiet promise of a shared future, a legacy of courage, love, and justice that would endure.